Now this evening we are going to present at the Carter-Jenkins Center the second part of the lecture on human aggression and youth violence. And here you have the person that is talking to you. So this is part 2, and we are going to talk now about youth violence around the world. We did talk in the previous lecture about violence around the world, violence in the United States, youth violence in the United States, and youth violence in the schools. And those of you that may have seen that lecture may have been as horrified as I was when looking at the actual statistics. Now, this is youth violence around the world. And youth here means, in this context, people between the ages of 10 and 29 years. In the year 2000, an estimated close to 200,000 youth homicides took place globally. And unfortunately, this is in the year 2000. Things have gotten worse since that time, significantly so, but it's the most recent statistic that I could get from the World Health Organization. So in that year, 2000, close to 200,000 youth homicides took place globally, with an average, listen to this, of 565 children, adolescents, and young adults between 10 and 29 years dying daily, every day. 565 children, adolescents, and young adults. And this was all as a result of interpersonal violence. The homicide rates vary in the world by region, from 0.6 per 100,000 in Europe, in France, which is 0.6, parts of Asia and the Pacific, to 30.4 per 100,000 as the average in Latin America. Notice, from 0.6 to 60.4 in Latin America. The rate jumps, in fact, if you thought 36.4 was large, it jumps to 84.4 per 100,000 in Colombia, and 50.2 per 100,000 in El Salvador, 41.8 per 100,000 in Puerto Rico, and so on. They are astonishing figures. France, on the other hand, as I already mentioned, is 0.6 per 100,000. Compare that with Colombia, with 84.4 per 100,000. Germany has 0.8 per 100,000. The United Kingdom, England, 0.9 per 100,000, and Japan is the lowest of them all at 0.4 per 100,000. Generally, homicidal rates are substantially lower among females. For example, it's 30.1 to 1 in Colombia. So there are 30.1 homicides by males, in contrast to 1 by females in Colombia. In the United States, between 1985 and 1994, there was an increase of homicides of 77% from 8.8 per 100,000 to 15.6 per 100,000, with 70% of the homicide involving guns. In Mexico, in contrast, the rates remain high but stable during the same period, that is from 14.7 to 15.6 per 100,000, with guns accounting for 50% of all homicides. So, you see, the record in the United States during those years was worse than in Mexico. That may not be the case in the year 2011 and the last few years. For every youth homicide, there are around 20 to 40 victims of non-fatal violence that require hospital treatment, emergency treatment. 20 to 40 victims for every homicide. As with fatal youth violence, the majority of non-fatal victims are males. The rates of non-fatal injuries increases dramatically during mid-adolescence and young adulthood, with fewer firearms attacks, using instead fists, feet, knives, and clubs. Fights, we're talking now about the universe, around the world, the whole universe, are common in school, just like they were in the States, with males fighting 2 or 3 times more frequently than girls. Bullying is a common problem all over the world, just as it was in the United States of America. In Scotland, 34.1 of males and 8.6 of females ages 11 to 16 years had carried weapons at least once during their lifetime into a school. In the United States, a national survey of students between 14 and 17, as we have seen, found that 17.3 had carried weapons in the previous 30 days and 6.9 did so in the school premises, a little less than in Scotland. Though in the States we're talking about the last 30 days, the previous 30 days to the service, and in Scotland we're talking about the lifetime. So the phenomenon is more frequent in the United States. Alcohol and drugs are clearly among the most significant causes of violence all over the world. Now let me talk about some factors that seem to play a role in the violence of youth. They include a prior history of violence, children that are hyperactive, impulsive, with behavior control and attention problems, that is, children with ADHD are at high risk, complications during the delivery are, according to some study, a phenomenon that may have something to do with later violence, though this is not necessarily well established. But some research has shown that complications during the delivery was a predictor for arrest up to 22 years, and that 80% of youth arrested for violence score in the high range of complications in the deliveries when compared with those doing the property offenses or those with normal deliveries, but these results have not been replicated. So there is some uncertainty about all of this. It may be that pregnancy and delivery complications predict violence mainly or only when associated with other problems within the family. Another risk, of course, is family violence. Gangs, drugs, alcohol, and early tobacco use seems to be a factor that somehow indicates the potential for a role in youth violence. Association with delinquent peers, particularly in gangs, is another phenomenon that clearly has a significant role in this violence, these homicides, in drugs problems and the like. Poor family functioning, as I mentioned, particularly there is violence. Poor grades in schools tend to point in that direction, and some people believe that poverty in the community plays a role as well. Now this is the role of gangs, and you see here in the United States in the year 1996, that's a long time ago, 15 years ago, which means the problem is worse now. There were 31,000 gangs operating in about 4,800 cities and towns, but the numbers, actual numbers of these 31,000 gangs was not known. In El Salvador and Honduras, there were an estimated 30,000 to 35 gang members. Gangs are generally a male thing, though of late in the United States in particular, girls are forming gangs, which are quite dangerous. Gangs are associated with violence always, and youths that join them become more violent and engage in risky and illegal activities practically immediately. In a longitudinal study that took place in Rochester, New York, of 1,000 youth showed that 30% of the sample were gang members. In this 1,000 youth in the sample, and accounted for 70% of self-reported violent crimes and 70% of drug dealing, which further complicates the problem. Here you have, from the Bureau of Justice statistics, the role of drugs and crimes. And you can see that there is a close relationship between drugs and crimes. It says here that drugs are related to crime in a multiplicity of ways. Most directly, it is a crime to use, to possess, to manufacture or distribute drugs classified as having a potential for abuse. Cocaine, heroin, marijuana, and amphetamines are examples of drugs classified to have abuse potential. Drugs are also related to crime through the effects they have in the user's behavior and by generating violence and other illegal activity in connection with drug trafficking. And here you have a scheme summarizing the various ways that drugs and crimes are related, and you can read through it in your own time. Interesting enough, if you look at drug use and drug use in lifestyle, drug use and crime are common aspects of the violent lifestyle. The likelihood and frequency of involvement in illegal activity is increased because drug users may not participate in the legitimate economy and are exposed to situations that encourage crime. Indeed, they frequently commit crimes to provide themselves with the drugs. And now, and this is a good example of the problem of drugs and violence. This is a picture that appeared recently in the news in the United States on TV and in the computer news. And that is that a wave of pharmacy robberies is sweeping the United States as desperate addicts and ruthless dealers turn to violence to feed the nation's growing hunger for narcotic painkillers. Criminals are holding pharmacies at gunpoint and escaping with thousands of powerfully addictive pills that can sell for as much as $80 a piece on the street. And that's where this news appeared in MSNBC.com in the internet. In this particular occasion of this picture, as you see, people are placing flowers in the front of the pharmacy. 4 people were killed: a pharmacist, a young teenager assistant of the pharmacist, and 2 clients of the pharmacy. And this is happening all over the United States with an incredible frequency. This is again very disturbing. It's violence against people with disability. And again, it's from the Bureau of Justice Statistics. And the present findings about non-fatal, violent, and property crimes experienced but in the year 2008 by people with disabilities include the estimates of, as I said, non-fatal, but violent crimes of victimization. That means rape, sexual assault, robbery, aggravated and simple assault, and property crime, that is burglary, motor vehicle theft, and theft in general against persons with disabilities. It compares the victimization experience of persons with and without disability using population estimates based on the Census Bureau's American Community Service, ACS. The data are presented on victim and crime characteristics of persons and with and without disabilities, including age, race, and gender distribution, offender weapon use, victim injuries, and reporting to the police. Highlights include the following: adjusting for the very age distributions of persons with and without disability, the violent crime rate against persons with disability was 40 violent crimes per 1,000 persons, ages 12 or older, which was double the violent crime rate for persons without disabilities, 20 per 1,000. Now you have to think about this. What is it that leads these criminals to behave in this particular form and to single the handicap in this way? Obviously, they lack empathy. Obviously, they have no superego, no guilt, nothing. They are driven by dark, obscure forces. And all of this needs to be examined and investigated if we are going to understand how and why aggression gets out of shape in a large number of people and leads to these horrendous type of behaviors and amount of suffering and damage to other human beings. Now, among the types of disabilities measured in 2008, persons that had cognitive disabilities had the highest risk of violent victimization. Shameful, but true. Household burglary made up a high percentage of all property crime against households with persons with a disability, 25%, than against households without persons with disability, which was only 19%. Now, as I want to refer a little bit to some incongruencies and other factors that we need to think about, because this is a universal tragedy of enormous proportion that creates enormous losses, enormous amount of suffering, enormous amount of loss of life, and beyond the loss of life, enormous amount of people that remain handicapped because of these violent assaults for the rest of their life, damaged in one way or another. And what is shocking is the amount of indifference and neglect that we see in the press, in the radio, in the television, everywhere, in the government, among the citizens of the world, let alone the citizens of this country, in the United States. And I want to contrast some of these things and show you how some factors, which are of a different type, they are cultural, religious factors, may influence some of this behavior and justify it. Here you have, for a comparison, the military and civilian kills during World War II. And this is another horror. Wars, even for those that win the war, represent an incredible amount of suffering, loss of human life, destruction, irreparable damage for life. And it is shocking that human beings that are presumed to be intelligent, capable, rational, and empathic had to go to these extremes in spite of the well-known consequences of going through that road, and that there are no other, at the present time, it seems, means of deterring this behavior that lead in that particular direction. But here you have the total population in the year 1939, that's the year that the war, Second World War began, was 1,978,967,400 people. The military deaths are calculated between 22 and 25 military personnel of the different countries that were involved in the war lost their life. The civilian deaths were even worse. They were calculated between 37 and 55 million people. You put that together, you are talking, if you take the maximum estimate of about 80 million people that were killed during the Second World War. And one has to ask, is this the only way of dealing with this type of problem? Or are there other potential avenues that must be explored to resolve this type of international conflict or civil wars or whatever? So the total deaths, as you see, go anywhere up to practically 80 million. And the deaths as percentage of the 939 population was estimated between 3.17 to 4%. Horrendous. Here you can see an example of the way that some cultural religious factors play a role in these things. And of course, that is a significant problem, difficult to resolve. What you're seeing in this picture are people that were hanged in the way that you see here. One of them is a woman that was accused of being unfaithful, so she was hanged. The other two are two young males that were homosexuals and were lovers and were found to be lovers. And of course, in the Iran, where this took place, these cultural religious factors lead to these people to be convicted and killed. It's, in their culture, that's the law. To us, that's a horrendous fact. Here you have the two males that were hanged because they were homosexual lovers. Now think of this, the aggression and the Holocaust that took place preceding the Second World War and following during the war. And you have here the number of deaths in this war. Mostly Jewish people, but not only. Gypsies were involved as well, and some other type of people, but mostly Jewish citizens. As you see, in Germany, 130,000 were killed in horrendous ways. I'm sure you have seen the pictures of the concentration camps and the starvation practically to death, and the gas chambers and for children and adolescents and women and men and whatnot. You can see the figures here that go as high in Hungary and Ukraine to 402,000, in the Netherlands to 106,000, in Poland and the Soviet Union 4,565,000 people were killed. The total is presumed to be 6,017,760 people. The children that were murdered in the Holocaust are estimated as high as 1.5 million, though the actual figures will never be known. We need to give a lot of thought to how and for what reason human beings can engage in this type of behavior without any empathy, any feeling of guilt, any shame, any nothing. It's a remarkable event. There are people, as you know, nowadays, that denies that the Holocaust exists. But it did exist, and General Eisenhower, later President of the United States, when he liberated Germany and went into the concentration camps, ordered his photographers in the troops to take pictures, making the statement, just in case that somebody tries to deny that this happened, which is happening nowadays, certainly in Iran. A lot to think about. Here you can see a mass grave, and there is a Jew kneeling there, and there is a soldier about to blow his head off, and he will fall in that common mass grave. That was in the Soviet Union in 1942, and the photograph was inscribed as the last Jew in Vinnytsia. Now, what you see here are the coffins in which our heroes, soldiers in our army fighting in Afghanistan and Iraq were transported after their death in combat to the United States. But let me call your attention that these heroes gave their life to defend our freedom and our integrity. But there is a contrast to be made. Since 2001, more than 6,000 members of the United States Army Services are said to have died in the two wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. Let me, without in any way trying to diminish the enormous loss that this death represented to all of us in America and to their families, and acknowledging the fact that these are heroes that have stood for our freedoms and were given to give their life. And as such, they deserve the greatest of respect and admiration. But compare the numbers of deaths with other deaths that take place in this country and all over the world without there being a beep said about it. When these recently 5 or 6 American soldiers were killed in Afghanistan through the activities of some terrorists, rightly it appeared in all the American newspaper and all the television, and there was an enormous feeling of loss, which was certainly more than granted and justified. Yet the contrast with the losses that we suffer constantly and ignore in other ways of our fellow citizens seem to be ignored, and in a way kind of certainly surprises me that we are so indifferent to it. Let me give you some examples. Let me talk about the role of aggression in accidents, and I call it, is it bullying, stupidity, or irresponsibility? What is it? Maybe the three of them. The road traffic injuries. Nearly 3,500 people die on the world roads every day. Not 5 or 6 soldiers in Iran or Afghanistan. 3,500 people die on the world roads every day of the year. Tens of millions people are injured or disabled every year. Children, pedestrians, cyclists, and the elderly are among the most vulnerable of road users. The World Health Organization works with partners, governmental and non-governmental, around the world to raise the profile of the preventability of road traffic injuries and promote good practices related to helmet and seatbelt wearing, not drinking and driving, not speeding, and being visible in traffic. I don't know how it is driving in the cities where you live. Where I live in Tampa, it's an absolute nightmare. And I never drive the car without seeing 4 or 5 or more in just 4 or 5 miles, types of behavior that could lead to death. A lot of bullying, a lot of stupid behavior, a lot of irresponsible behavior. Of course, there are a lot of drunk people driving and a lot of people that does drugs, but there is more to that, and again, we need to study, because it seems criminal that 3,500 people have to die on the world roads every day when a significant number of these people are being killed, essentially, by drivers. Now, road traffic injuries and a major but neglected public health challenge that requires concerted efforts for effective and sustained prevention. Of all the systems with which people have to deal every day, road traffic systems are the most complex and most dangerous. Worldwide, an estimated 1.2 million people are killed in road crashes each year, and as many as 60 million are injured. Projections indicate that these figures will increase by about 65% over the next 20 years, unless there is new commitment to prevention. Nevertheless, the tragedy behind this figure attracts less mass media attention than other less frequently type of tragedy. I'm pretty sure that most of you were not aware that 1.2 million people are killed in road crashes each year, or that over 5,000 people are killed in this country in that way. And you have to ask yourself, much of this is really preventable. If you drive a car in the city where I live, you can see why there are so many accidents and why there are so many people driving cars that are either irresponsible, they are either stupid, they are bullies, or they think they're on the wall and have no ability to foresee that their behavior may lead to the death and the tragedy that that represents when you kill a father, a mother, or a child. Obviously, this has a lot to do with human aggression. More than a dozen large studies over the past decade have concluded that the cameras in intersections in the road reduce accidents and injuries. The most recent that was published in February by the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety in the United States crunched 10 years of federal traffic data for the 99 largest U.S. cities, 14 of which now deploy cameras, and calculated that had all 99 installed devices, 850 lives would have been saved from 2004 through 2008. 850 lives. Some cities, including Los Angeles, are in the process of taking them down due to a strong opposition of citizens that see it as an abuse form of raising revenues, which indeed, unfortunately, it has become, and consequently has obscured the fact that this was a preventive measure that could have saved a lot of lives. Politicians trying to raise more money have obscured the fact and kind of distorted the issues that are involved. I give you an example. In Arizona, the state of Arizona, the tickets per infraction are $446. You cross past the line where the stop is, and the camera see the tire of your car a foot past that line, you get a ticket for $446, which of course is a distortion of what should have been a measure to help avoid crashes and death and other type of incidents. In Tampa, you get a $150 ticket for infraction. 400 cameras in Chicago, for example, generated more than 64 million in 2009. Yet, in reality, the research on the effect of red light cameras in the United States is incomplete and often contradictory. But as you see, it's being exploited. And something that could have been helpful has been rejected now because it has been abused for other purposes, which have nothing to do with saving life and preventing suffering and destruction and losses. And that concludes the second part of this lecture. Here is the Carter-Jenkins Center. It tells you what we do, and we certainly will welcome your help to continue this labor. And here you have some internet address of the center that will lead you to hundreds of issues of mental health and the like. As I mentioned earlier, there'll be a third part. We will be taking a look at why it is that these different horrors, particularly the situation of violent crime, homicide, rape, violent assault, and all of that has increased at the rate it has in this country and all over the world.